Hello, I'm Dermot O'Connor. In this series, I'll be covering tips and tricks to help your animations have more vitality and quality. Not just that, the correct application of these techniques can also increase your output, sometimes dramatically. Each week, I'll not only cover the basic principles of animation, but also show you how to apply them in practical examples. It's one thing to know about squash and stretch, timing, the creation of keyframes and breakdowns, but it's another thing to see how they're correctly applied. The best animators know how to create the illusion of complexity by working on top of a few very simple building blocks. It's easy to create simple and stiff animation, and it's easy to create fussy and loose animation. The challenge is to find the sweet spot, the Goldilocks zone, where the balance is just right. Getting to this level takes time. I know other artists who are naturals, and they were drawing feature quality work in their late teens. Aptitude varies, but hard work and perseverance are the most crucial qualities that you can have. So put this series in your playlist, and each week a new movie will appear in your queue. With patience and practice, you'll be on your way, and we might even have a little fun. So thanks for watching. In this lesson, I'll show you some of the techniques that I use to loosen up animation, how to stop it from feeling mechanical or limited. On the left, you can see a basic pointing action created with 2 keyframes. All the in-betweens are smooth, there's nothing interesting happening. On the right is the final loosened animation, and as you can see, it's a lot better. It's starting to get that classic look of character animation from the 1940s and 50s. So let's see how this was done. So here's the first key pose, then the halfway point or breakdown, and finally the end pose, pointing up to the top corner. Now, if we overlay these images, that's to keep things clear, I'll use green as an overlay color for the first, blue for the last, and then red for the breakdown, the halfway point between them. As you can see, it's perfectly half. There's nothing really interesting happening. That's the result when it's all smoothed out. It's smooth but dull. It's not jerky, it's smooth, but bland. So let's make some changes to break this thing up. And so let's keep the start and the stop keys. I'm not going to change the beginning or the end. I'm only going to change the breakdown. And that's the halfway point. I'm going to smash that elbow, make it bent, right here. So we're leading with the elbow. That area right there. It's like there's a magnetic field pulling the elbow up in this direction. Then we work into the pointing pose as before. And if we overlay them now, you can see where the leading action is from here. Also concentrates the hand frames a little lower, so we have more hand frames in this space and then a much snappier move into the pointing gesture. So it gives us texture in spacing. So now we get the breaking of the joint and the leading action. And here it is without the red. So using these 2 techniques, the leading action, pulling the elbow forward, and also the breaking of joints, like bending the joints. These are a huge first step towards loosening up any animation that you've got. So you're probably wondering, why does it still not look like the preview that I gave you at the beginning of the movie? In the next movie, we're going to really start pushing these methods and these techniques to a whole new level. And at that point, you're going to see how the whole process comes together to give us the classic 1940s animation flexibility. In a previous movie, I showed you how to begin the process of loosening up a pointing action by breaking a joint on a limb and using a leading action. Now we're going to really take the process even further. So what we're going to do is add motion to the total body, a squash, an anticipation, an overshoot, and then settling. So I've got it in green, dark grey for the anticipation, red for the breakdown or overshoot, and then blue for the settle. So we go from the start, anticipation, overshoot or breakdown, and then the final settle pose. And just to overlay them, if you want to, have a general outline of where these poses exist in relation to each other in space, if you want to try to, replicate this, if you're working in a CGI or some other medium, that's the kind of range of motion I'm working with here. So one of the principles that I'm applying with these new poses is to use reversal, and that is the line of action, which would roughly correspond sometimes with the spinal column. And notice how it's a C shape here at the beginning, and by the end of the scene, between the 2 center poses, it's reversing from one orientation to the other. And these kind of flexes create flexibility or looseness to the character. So notice you're not seeing the red line, but you still feel that flexibility. So you can build your entire poses around these lines to get good, strong, dynamic positions. And good transitions as well happen when you do a reversal from one line of action into its opposite. So you would snap from this to bam to that. So this gives you a very strong hit reaction, for example. Now this next change is subtle and it's advanced. So don't feel, too freaked out by it. Once you begin to do material like this, we're getting into feature animation skills. So what I'm going to do is show you what happens when we lead, not just in space, but in time. So on the left side, we have the previous animation that we left off. The center animation, I'm going to start moving the arm 1 frame before the body. And on this figure here, 2 frames before the body. So this will anticipate. So imagine that you're sitting still and you're going to reach out to pick up a pencil. Generally, you'll tend to move your hand before your head. You know, oh, I've got to reach for that, and you know it's over there, so I'm going to move. And I'm physically in the booth, I'm doing it instinctively. So you can imagine that we don't all move like robots, like we're all built out of metal. We all move at different speeds. Different parts of the body move at different times. That's what you're about to see now. So I'm showing the leads little flashing in red, so you can see where I'm leading the action with the shoulder, and then the leading action moves on to the elbow, and then it moves to the hand. So we have one lead leads to the next, to the next. If you're finding it hard to see, I'm going to slow this down. Now we're at half speed. And if it's still a little tricky, first of all, see if you can tell, like watch what's happening here. Look at this shoulder, for example, and see how it's edging up, because I had to change the design to assimilate this leading action. I'm going to slow it down now to 1/3 speed. Now you should be able to see it. So now just sit back from the screen a little bit. Look at the left side and you'll see, it's physically it's doing something interesting, but in time, everything's moving on the same keys. Flash over to the right side. Arm starts moving just before. Shoulder before head. So it's visually beginning to look a lot more interesting. So here's the scenes again, full speed and without the red. So you can evaluate it a little more evenly. You can apply the same principle to any part of the body, and it's really easy to do it to the head. Let's drag the head by 1 frame. Looks really nice. And that was not as painful to do as the hand. It didn't involve as much finessing the model as it required with the shoulder, for example. And if I slow it down just a little bit, let's go to 1/3. You'll see we start generating some very bizarre looking individual images, but the overall motion is looking much nicer. It's a trade-off. So let's add another little touch. Right here, I have an overshoot on the hand. So it doesn't just go into the pointing position, it overshoots and settles. So I'll try to call it out, and let's do it at half speed so you can see it. Overshoot, settle. Overshoot, settle. So the hand is going out and then in. It doesn't just move up into that position. There's another subtlety I want you to notice, and that's the finger. The transition from the finger, from a fist to a pointing gesture, now happens there, so you can actually see the finger unfurl. Otherwise, that gesture gets lost in this whole huge motion. And then I thought, maybe I can push this just 1 more frame. So I dragged the head by, or delayed the motion of the head by 1 more frame. And that gives us our final classic look to the action. So we've kind of smashed every stiff factor that might make this look like a symbol-based animation. And now it's looking like it was drawn in 1949. So just to sum up, the major techniques that I used in this lesson were the breaking of joints, the use of leading action. In time and space, I used reversal, anticipation, and overshoot. So it's how you bring these various components together that will determine how loose and how fluid and how classic your animation will look. Do not expect to get here overnight, and you can apply them one at a time, see what works for you. But keep these tricks, these techniques in mind, and I think it'll really be a help. In this lesson, I'll show you the potential pitfall of twinning, and by avoiding it, how to loosen up your scene. Twinning is an easy trap to fall into, but there are also times when it's okay to twin. As you can see in this illustration, we have a simple action with the character making a "what's up" gesture. Now the problem is that the animation starts in a symmetrical pose, stays symmetrical throughout the entire scene. This can look a little mechanical, a little stiff. Also a little unnatural. Now, there are animated shows on television that allow this as part of their house style. I'm not going to name them. Some of them are extremely funny and extremely good, but keep an eye out and you'll probably notice. It doesn't bother them, so for horses for courses. The advantage of scenes like this is that they're much easier to animate because you just go through like this with these simple poses and all of your keyframes occur on the same frame numbers. In this case, all I need is 4 keys, and these are glorified in-betweens. So it's not hideous, but it's much in keeping with that TV style. But what if you want to push your work to look more like feature style animation? And then we need to break this action apart and to reduce or eliminate this kind of twinning. So in this image of the timeline, you'll see where the keyframes were placed for the previous animation. The left and the right arms are both held until frame 11. The entire pose pretty much is until here. And that's when they start to move. And then they hit those positions on frames 15, 18, and 23. And my frame rate for this was about 30 frames per second. So here are the poses with the relative frame numbers. So one way to break the twinning effect is to do it with time. Let's simply take the right arm, and we're not going to change the positions of the arm. We're just going to move it forward in time. So instead of starting the motion on frame 11, just slide the entire action forward by 1 frame. Now this is what happens. As you can see, that 1 frame shift has an immediate effect. I think even at normal speed, you can surely see it. Now, of course, this makes your animation quite a bit more complex, as your previously tidy stack of keys on 11, 15, 18, and 23 will now also contain keyframe actions for the arm on 10, 14, 17, and 22. Let's continue this principle to see if we can be more aggressive. Let's move the right arm forward by 2 frames. So now we will have our keys on 9, 13, 16, and 21. This is the result. And you see it's already becoming even more obvious. Now, when I said the final keyframe would be on 21, we can end both on the same frame, of course. We don't have to snap this arm into an end pose. So let me show you what that looks like. So for example, as we're mechanically sliding all of these forward to here, this end pose 21, that can be on 23. We're not obliged to moronically move all of these forward by 1. We can end this one here or here. This one can end there or there. So this has been illustrated just for geometrical simplicity. So let's proceed. I'm going to move it forward now by another frame. So now the arm is leading by 3 frames. Now, as you can see, a very different action again. I'm going to continue now, and we'll just do the same thing by 4 frames. And now it is so obvious that nobody could miss it. And if I just pause this at some point in the middle, pick any frame, they're all going to look quite different, much more natural. So as I said earlier, you're not obligated to mechanically slide one set forward by 1. This was a very good example of just doing it for your first time. For example, I can move it to the first frame on 9, then to 12, then 15, lining up again, and then ending much later on 24. Move these around, see what works, see what doesn't. One part might lead and then follow behind and then catch up again. So these kinds of leading actions and following actions, they are going to be varied. So I don't want you to take away from this, all I have to do is slide 1 half of the body forward by 1. It's certainly the quickest, most efficient way of doing it, but there are many ways to play with breaking up the motion of your character so that you get these much more interesting and natural actions. So here I've applied the same principle, but I've moved the whole body. So now the body moves down on an anticipation, up on an overshoot, and then settles. Of course, this does complicate the drawing process if you're animating this on paper. It means you've got to redraw all of your keys and breakdowns. And this was one of the big time sucks when we used to do this by hand on paper. But for those of you working in CGI or in Adobe Flash, Adobe Animate, or Toon Boom Harmony, these sort of tweaks might be a lot quicker and easier to make if you're working with a rig or a puppet. So as you can see, we've come a long way since version 1 of this action. One last thing to remember, you can fight twinning or symmetry through time, as we've done here, but you can also fight it by changing the pose. So in this version, I made a small change to the left hand of the character, placing it on his hip and breaking the physical twinning. Now, when we play the scene, there's almost no twinning left. The final pose still twins, and that's fine. I like this pose, and there are times in life when we do hold strong, symmetrical positions, and this is a really good example of one. So remember the 3 things. Firstly, you can fight symmetry in animation by changing keyframe positions through animation. Secondly, you can fight symmetry by changing the pose. And thirdly, remember that sometimes a twin pose is the right one for the scene, as you're looking at right now. It's all too easy to fall into the trap of being timid when animating the head. Even in the days of hand-drawn animation, junior animators had a tendency to avoid articulating the head, in spite of the fact that the head is an extremely flexible object. This is made worse with puppet-based animation like Adobe Flash or Animate or Toon Boom Harmony. It's very common to see scenes with an up-down settle pattern. In effect, the head is like a little spring, whereas in reality, the head's more like a ball socket, and we need to be able to move past this cliche or pattern. So let's see how. The most obvious thing to remember is that we can pivot from the base of the neck and the base of the skull. So I've marked these 2 pivot points with these red crosses. And here I'm overlaying the images to give you an idea of the distance and spacing I use for this animation. So about from here to there. And here's the travel for the opposite side. So how far you can push your character before the design or model, if you're working with a CGI or a 2D puppet, might constrain this part of your animation. But it's a good idea to have an animated character that can look good in an upshot. And finally, the down position be about here. Now let's look at the animation of this basic cross movement again, and I've added dotted lines for the eye line and the center line to illustrate the degree of movement. And here again, without the dotted lines, so a little more natural. Next, we have the ability to rotate the head. Now this can be done from the neck or the base of the skull. In this example, when I rotated the skull, I found it easier to use the center of the skull as the axis. So you can use whatever works for you. These are cartoon characters, so you can, if you want to pivot the skull from here or from there, your design, your rig might vary. But that looks pretty good. So again, to break this down, here we have the range of rotation pivoting from the neck, the red cross, from there to here. And the same rotation to the opposite side. I could have gone further, but I wanted to give you a more modest example. So here's the pivot effect when using the skull as the axis of rotation. Again, note that I set the pivot point in the center of the skull, but I could have used the base had I wanted to. So whatever's most appropriate. So here's the animation with the dotted lines again to illustrate the eye lines and the center line. And again without. Another range of motion that's very useful to consider is a kind of a clock motion. And this allows your character to both rotate and pivot around any point of the clock that works best. So again, we're thinking about the ball sockets that we have at the base of the skull or the center of the skull that allows us this range of motion. So here are the 8 positions that I used to create this animation overlaid, just to give you a general idea of the spacing of these different positions. And here they are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, back to the first one. And I'll repeat the clock animation again with the dotted lines. And without the dotted lines. He looks pretty flexible. All that yoga came in handy. So we have these different kinds of motion from the base of the neck or the skull, but we can also get great flexibility and looseness by combining them. So here I have rotated around the neck and then pivoted the skull. The dotted line should help you see what's happening. So we combine and we stack these different kinds of rotations. We get all kinds of different options available to us. And here it is without the dotted lines, so maybe it looks a little more natural. Hey, come over here. This way. So you get the idea. So when we combine these different kinds of rotations and pivots into one scene, what do we get? Here, I just took a few of my poses from the preceding sections and just put them together on the timeline to see what happens. So you can imagine if this guy was talking, I don't believe that. No, this isn't possible. You can imagine any kind of line of dialogue you want over this, but you get the idea. There's flexibility happening here. This isn't a head on a spring by any stretch of the imagination. And actually, you'll notice too, I've pretty much locked the neck in place. He's not really moving very much from here. And even within that physical constraint, this scene feels quite loose. So you're already moving beyond the kind of the prison or the straitjacket of the tyranny of the puppet or the rig. So try to apply these principles of rotations, pivots, and tilts to your character's head, and hopefully you can break out of that trap. You might have heard the expression cartoon physics. And here's the classic example of cartoon physics, familiar to anyone who has seen a Roadrunner cartoon. The character runs off a cliff, but doesn't fall until they realize that they're floating in air, and usually after they've been floating in air for a few seconds. Now, although this action does violate our physics, actual physics, it does obey its own mad internal logic. So I'm going to look at how to apply classic animation principles to achieve this and what to avoid. So here's an example of lazy cartoon physics. The character runs out and then they just fall. Now, about 4 days after I created this animation, I actually saw a cartoon on TV where someone did this and it was cheap. And why it's cheap is, it's not cheap until here. It's cheap until, let me slow this down to about a third. And you'll see what's happening is he's running off screen. I'll speed it back up again until we get back out and then slow him back down. So what's happening with the cheap version is not very much. He's just falling like in one stretched animation. That's terrible. So to show you the right way again, classic cartoon physics involves applying physics selectively over time. So let's start with the floating pose. Notice that there is no gravitational effect at the moment. He might as well be floating in outer space wearing a spacesuit. So what happens is gravity hits his feet first. Doesn't hit anywhere else, just his feet. Now I've actually simplified this. We could have even taken this further, but let's keep it simple. So the feet fall faster now, and then the gravitational effect finally hits his waist, which slowly moves. Now I've begun to move the head by a tiny amount also, but really not as much as it should be moving. But if you really wanted to push this, you could actually lock the head down too and not even move it at all. The hands are moving up to kind of oppose the falling lower half. But again, I could as easily have held them in place holding a cup of tea. So the classic sight gag from the 1940s or 50s would have been to have the character reach behind and hold out a sign saying, uh-oh, or something silly like that. So now we have extreme falling on the legs with really pulling the stretch as far as we can. We're really pulling out the body to be almost a noodle. And as you can see, we have an upper zone with almost no gravitational influence and an extreme gravitational influence towards the feet. And now the neck is feeling the pull. And again, we are just destroying this character's anatomy at this point. I would not want to have this hanging on the wall. It's not meant to be seen. This is a frame that's meant to be felt. Especially this one. And at this point, again, the neck is a noodle. The arms as well. Worse here. And then we're finally off screen. So what we have on these numbers at the top give you frame counts for the points at which if you want to apply something like this to an animation of your own, this will give you a feeling for the kind of punishment that you have to inflict upon the character to get this kind of classic cartoon physics look. Now, when I said that we were dealing with cartoon physics, that doesn't mean we can just be arbitrary and quote unquote magical in our approach to things like falling. So these line spacings here represent any given point. It could be the top of the skull or the eye line, but for every frame on the descent, he is getting faster and faster and faster and faster. We would never, even though we are violating some physical laws or making up our own, we wouldn't want to have this one down here and sticking, because that will just look bad. So the audience can accept zany cartoon physics, but they won't accept things slowing up, speeding up, and just being jaggy all the way down. That's just ugly to the eye. And of course, the one last thing that I added, which is a little bit beyond the scope of this, is the classic smoke poof and speed lines, which you'll see right there. So a little bit beyond the scope of this course to get into the creation of those, but they were always like a vital little icing on the cake for the world of cartoon physics. I'll be dealing with the creation of effects like these in a later course, but for now that's a useful look at the right way and the wrong way of approaching cartoon physics. Traditional animation made great use of staggers. So here's a typical example. It's a basic scream. So these kind of basic screams are made with just two keys. First, a head in one position, and then the second key in the ending position. So in this case, an open mouth with a scream, basically. So when you animate between these, this is how you would animate them. You would go from the bottom to the top. You basically slow out from one and slow into the other, and that gives you this smooth motion. This is clearly not a stagger. It's a smooth opening mouth. So normally when you would expose your drawings in front of the camera, number 1 goes on frame 1, drawing 2 on frame 2, drawing 3 on 3, 4 on 4, 5 on 5, 6 on 6, so on. The stagger was created by taking 1, 2, and 3, and then shooting frames 2 and 3 and 4, and then go back 1, 3, 4, 5, then back 1, 4, 5, 6, then back 1, 5, 6, 7. Very simple. And this is what creates the stagger. It's this 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. There are other stagger patterns, but this would be the classic. You could go 4 back, 4 forward, 3 back, vary it, make it random, do all kinds of things. But this would be the classic stagger. So here is the same animation, but just with a more detailed character design. So what if you're working with the computer program Adobe Flash or Animate or Toon Boom Harmony or After Effects or some other software? Sadly, I can't go into each and every piece of computer software out there to show you how it's done, but it has been done and can be done in Flash by setting symbols, keyframes on the outer stage. It can be done in Harmony by changing exposures. It can certainly be done in After Effects. But the nuts and bolts of whatever software you're using, be it 2D or CGI, I'm afraid it's up for you to figure out how precisely it can be done. If you do have CGI software, you could, for example, export a smooth PNG sequence, bring those PNGs into a program like After Effects, and then rearrange them on the timeline as you require. So even if your software can only export a PNG sequence, there are other ways and workarounds that will allow you to create these staggers. But I'm dealing here with staggers, so I'm going to move on from that and show you some more. I love this kind of stagger. It's the diving board in the swimming pool. Someone's just jumped off of it and boing. It's a lovely mechanical spring effect. So let's see how this was done. So we have our start position. That's static, nothing happening here. And then we have one keyframe in a down position and another in an up position. So essentially we have 3 keys now. We have the 0 pose, the flat, we have the key in the down, a key in the up position. Now we create 2 families or sets of in-betweens. The first will go from the down position up into the static position. And the second will go from the up position into the down position. So each one I would think would best be slowing in from the up into the down. So if we overlay both of these, this is roughly what's happening. So in this chart, in comparison to the basic stagger pattern, what we have are two sets. Now in the past, what we would have done would have been to have taken the odd numbers from one set and the even numbers from another set and just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that's what gives us the doing effect. You could just as easily go 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, as long as you're moving from one column to the other column. That would last longer, of course. So you can see there are different ways of moving from one of these patterns to the other to get the zigzag stagger effect. And just to remind you, that is the final effect when you go from one column to the other column of our two different sets of actions. You're probably wondering how often you're going to be animating diving planks. The fortunate thing is that this can be applied to characters. So the zigzag for a character screaming can be done. So here we have two sets of our character screaming, and you should be able to identify from this that this is the same basic technique. Now, there's no stagger applied yet. What I'm doing, I'm going to slow this down to 1/3 speed. I animated two sets here, and I'm playing them twice so you can see them. So we have a scream to the left, I, a scream to the right, E, and then overlaid together. So as we had with the planks, we have two different sets of screams. So now when we alter the exposure to the zigzag exposure that we saw in the previous chart, we get these really nice scream effects. Here's a hand-drawn version that I did previously. It's a much more subtle one. It may look like a simple from low to high, but there's actually two different sets of slightly different arced screams happening here to get a really, really extreme panic reaction. And for an example of what a fully rendered stagger looks like in color, here's a completely rendered one. I did this for a previous course, but it turned out beautifully, so it's worth seeing again. So be sure to keep staggers in mind because it's easy to overlook them when you're working with a 2D puppet or CGI animation, because it usually involves figuring out how to play with exposure sequences and trickery like that to create these custom effects. So I have a scary feeling that a lot of animators are forgetting how to use these kind of lovely tricks. So as I said earlier, Adobe Flash, Adobe Animate and Toon Boom Harmony and other software make this relatively easy. You can also apply them in After Effects if you can meddle around with exposure sequences. But even CGI animators, I think, can achieve these effects also with a little bit of effort. So I think the easiest way would be to render the staggers as PNGs and bring them into After Effects and do it in there to change the exposure patterns to start playing around with these very cool stagger effects. If you've worked on different animation productions, especially for television or for the web, you've probably seen something like this when it comes to doing dialogue. It's the AF mouth chart, which shows 6 basic mouth shapes. Now, some studios add a few more for custom mouths like F and L, where you see the teeth biting into the lip or the tongue hitting the roof of the mouth. But these 6 shapes are the most common. If you haven't seen this before, please don't be confused by the letters A through F. They do not correspond to the sounds made by the character. They're just labels that describe the different shapes. So the A mouth, for example, will be used for closed phonemes like B, 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 M, 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 and P. So closed mouth shape here, this would be OO sounds, does not correspond to the F sound, for example. So pretty straightforward. So here's what these shapes look like when played in sequence. Much, if not most, of the dialogue made for TV and the web, and even for some features now, can be pretty dull as a result, as these same 6 shapes are played over and over again in different sequences. But there's no real visual variation. That's CDCB, CDEF, CDA, CDB, and after a while you just get tired of looking at it. Now, this isn't the end of the world, and very often it's the only way that TV studios can meet their production deadlines and their budgets, so don't be too harsh on it. So we can certainly go a little bit beyond this. So with a little bit of effort, we can certainly reach for a more interesting style. What you're seeing here is the same series of shapes, but I've treated them to feature approach. And this approach can be summed up in one word, and that word is chewy, as in make the character look like they're eating. This is more possible on a CG animated character, as the riggers can create these really nice blend shapes, which will then cascade down to production. So they would make like an A shape that would look like, or a D shape, the D mouth would look like this. The A mouth might look sad or You might have a really nice ooh mouth, but the entire face is flexing around. The whole thing is moving. It's possible sometimes with some rigs in Flash or Harmony to get the same effect. I'm going to confess, I made this in Flash. So there, what you going to do about it? And I know a lot of people are snobby about Flash. It's not the tool. It's about how you approach the tool and how much juice you can get out of it. You can do rubbish dialogue in Flash. You can do good dialogue in Flash. Same with CG. So we're trying to create feature dialogue regardless of the tool we're using. So it's a really good idea to remember that even in reality, the human jaw is incredibly flexible. The jaw doesn't have the ability just to open. It can pivot from side to side, and it can open a lot, as you can see on this image right here. And we can move backwards and forwards, as you can see here. So remember this when you design your mouth shapes. You should be trying to accentuate reality, to go further than reality, not to go backwards from reality or to be more boring than the real world. So the focus of this movie isn't on lip sync or phrasing or how you apply these shapes to the sounds. It's on the approach to how creating the mouth shapes and the designs and animating them themselves. So nevertheless, a quick comment that the closed mouth works with B, M, and P sounds. The wide mouth is great for E sounds, as this one. So imagine me. The open mouth and the blended mouth shapes between it and these other shapes are great for vowel sounds. The pursed mouth, that's this one, that obviously, as you can tell, is great for ooh sounds. And the teeth mouth, if you want to create these kind of custom shapes, is great for F sounds. Now, I actually rarely use this one. I find that some of these closed mouth shapes do that job just as fine. And there's all kinds of different variants. This reminds me of like a 1950s gangster. Sing here, mate. You know, you can imagine him talking out of the corner of his mouth in a Humphrey Bogart movie. You can do variants of the E mouth where it's just all teeth. Me. And you can even say that with your teeth. My teeth right now are completely closed. I'm talking without opening my mouth. So you can try that yourself. Look in the mirror if you doubt it. Various variants of the open mouth, strong shapes built around this basic, simple kidney bean form. So as I toggle through these, notice how flexible the jaw is. And I built the mouth shapes around very strong and simple forms. In most cases, the mouth outline is a kidney bean and the jaw follows the pull of the lips. Try pulling the mouth to far out positions, see how far you can take your own family of shapes. So it's good to have a normal set that's fairly standard for regular dialogue, and then you can make these really exaggerated shapes for special moments. So remember to push the entire mass of the face as best as you can. A little bit of flex on the lower eyelid and the nose to follow the motions of the main mouth. Don't be afraid to try to pull the mouth to weird positions to one side or the other. And treat this like a cartoon. And again, like I said earlier, we're trying to improve on reality. We're not trying to make something less enjoyable than reality here. This is animation. In the last movie, I showed you a classic cartoony 1940s style figure in a front view dialogue scene with all the spectrum of mouth shapes from closed to wide to open. Now I want to take a look at a profile view of a different design character, a little more angular. And I wanted to show that you're not limited to just one version of each mouth shape in each position. So there's not just one closed mouth shape that you need to work from. And if you're thinking, why does he seem to be chewing? You've asked the right question. Though I'm not trying to make him speak, I still wanted to make the face seem as flexible as possible. In this case, as though he was eating. A good dialogue should look like it's chewy. Also note how the corner of the nose and the lower eyelid both move just a little bit. And this keeps the eye from reading the animation as limited or as though it's on layers. The whole mass of the face is being affected by the action of the dialogue. So here's a graphic that shows the 5 key poses for this particular closed mouth for comparison. And what I'm trying to convey here is the importance of not being afraid to move the corner of the mouth up or down or east or west. You should be able to get a nice circular or a kidney bean action to that, and that will pull and distort the rest of the character. And you'll notice even in this position, he still looks like himself. Your mouth is incredibly flexible, so don't let your cartoon characters be stiff. And now we'll just shuttle through these 5 drawings. As you can see, any 2 of them, you get a nice strong contrast. That'll be fun to look at. I also wanted to show you how to apply the same aggressive approach to flexibility with a more realistic design. Now, I imagine some are thinking that it's easy enough to be bold when working with a 1940s cartoony character. But what about a more naturalistic figure? I got to be stiff with them, right? Well, here's a tough guy, classic archetypal figure from central casting. And even with this guy, it's possible to push these mouth shapes quite far. And again, don't feel like you have to fall into a comfort zone. You need to push your designs until they look totally broken and then pull them back in until they look believable again. And actually, in this case, I probably had a bit of leeway. I could have gone maybe a little further with some of these and still produced these good, solid designs. So let's see how these look when animated. That's pretty solid, pretty chewy. And actually now when you see it animated, you're probably thinking, yeah, I bet I could have pushed them a bit further. So you see how timid you can become when you're working with a single drawing. So always be on the lookout for pushing your animation. And here are the 3 views all in between. And again, good, solid. I'm happy with them. But if I had a second pass, I'd be seeing if I could go maybe 10%, 15% further than this even. So that's the first of our courses on creating strong mouth shapes. To sum it up, build your library of mouth shapes around a core of essentials. You have to have a closed mouth, an E mouth where you go E, pull your corners of the mouth open, an oo mouth where it's pursed into the little tiny oo shape, and the wide open mouth. And then all of your other dialogue shapes will be in-betweens or tweens between those 4 essential forms. Once you have those good 4 shapes settled, you're 95% of the way at least towards creating interesting mouth dialogue and speaking scenes. This movie would be of most use to animators who work in traditional styles or who work with puppet-based systems, anyone who is able to create the animation frames by drawing them. If you're working in CGI, I'm not sure if this is useful to you, but you still might find it interesting. It can be pretty tedious to work a character from one pose to another, especially when that pose is really different. And if you've ever tried to twist a 2D puppet tool into a different pose, you know what a torture that can be. So while some of the time we can do this the hard way, there is a cheat that can, in some instances, be used. So as we can see, this is a snappy way of moving your character around. So I've got 3 key poses here, and I'm using this technique called the wipe. It's a smear, and it moves the character from one pose to the other. So let's take a closer look at these frames. So we start with the first key pose. I'll call that A. Our frame rate here, I think it's about 24 or 30 frames per second, but you wouldn't want to be much lower than that or the wipes might start being seen. We want them to be felt, not to be seen. I certainly wouldn't want to apply a wipe on 10 frames per second. I think it might be pushing our luck a little much. So I'm going to hold this pose for 12 frames so the eye can read it. And the next image will be for 1 frame only. And as you can see, our hand is looking like a sausage. The head's not moving very fast, so it's not really distorting very much at this point. The next image is the breakdown between the 2 keys, and this is only seen for 1 frame. The head is moving faster on this one, so it's starting to really distort. Note that the hands move the fastest, and they have been drawn as just a smear. Then this is the wipe. The foot rising off the ground is drawn as multiple images. So what I did here was to simulate a motion blur with a drawing, just in a traditional style. Now, this was done a great deal during the classic era of Looney Tunes cartoons. And you watch any of those cartoons, or a Roadrunner cartoon, and you're going to see a lot of this. And so then we have to settle out of the wipe back into our other key. And now we're beginning to look normal again. Most of the figure resumes its correct appearance with just smears on the fingers and a few multiples on the foot. Finally, we're back to rest on the next key pose, which we'll call B. Now, we could overshoot this pose slightly and then cushion or spring back into this, final one here if we wanted to add a little extra subtlety. But I wanted to keep this course simple, so let's just look at the wipe sections themselves. Now, the wipe into the next pose are even wilder because the range of motion is greater. So the first of the 3 wipe frames is a big one already. And this one is huge. And then we have the settling in where we're starting to look vaguely human again. And then we're into our final key pose, which we'll call C. And so when we compile these images together, making sure that each of the wipe frames is only on screen for 1 frame. So between A, B, and C, there's only 3 wipe frames between A and B, and 3 wipe frames between B and C. And we're holding A, B, and C, the major normal poses, for 12 frames or a second or so we can read them. And you can see how snappy that is. It really feels nice. So I like to show people how the frames relate to each other in depth as they're overlaid one on top of the other. So I'll show you the first key pose in green and the second key pose in blue. So when we overlay them, you can see how far the motion was. It really wasn't very much for the body. It's pretty normal, but the hard part was going to be getting the hand from here to here. So that was our first wipe in the dark color. So what I did was I just took the finger points, these areas here. I began drawing from here and just saw where they were ending and just drew these series of long, blurry smears from one to the other. That was the most important part of the entire drawing. Other parts move a lot less, such as the shoulder. That can be in between more normally. And the head is another squishy blob with the eyes feeling like jello. So these are the drawings where you really should be having fun. And now when we toggle between them, I'm just going back and forth. You see the effect. And there's the entire range of wipe frames from the A pose to the B pose. And 1x is 1 frame, just 1 exposure. That's all they are. In the previous movie, I showed you how to use the classic wipe technique to cheat from one dramatic pose into another dramatic pose without having to conventionally animate them. So there's another great application of this technique which allows you to move characters off the stage as quickly as possible, exit stage left or exit stage right, or to move them around. This method saved my life many years ago on a CD-ROM game that I directed back in the 1990s. And we were able to save a huge number of drawings by simply zooming the characters from pose to pose with these wipes. And it saved the audience and the game players a great deal of boredom. So let's have a look at this technique. Boom. So he's going from one pose to the other, and I've reused the smoke swirl to just add that kind of venerable 1940s, 50s style to it. So let's take a look at how this is done. So we have our classic boring zero pose, nothing interesting happening. And it's very important if you're going to execute one of these wipes from that position into a huge movement across the stage that you work into a strong anticipation pose. Otherwise, the audience has no idea that anything's going to happen. So a strong anticipation is vital if you're going to do one of these huge wipes. Now, I made no huge heroic attempts to make this in any way fancy. I wanted to do the crudest possible shape that I could think of just to show you what it might look like, what you might be able to get away with at speed. Now, in a final production, I would add a little more detail than this. I'd do some blurry shapes that would suggest eyes or a nose, maybe a couple of ellipses that would suggest a hand, maybe connect this a little more cleanly. But this essential form, this pattern, is a very good base to build from. You should be thinking in terms of these extremely simplified, elongated blobs. And at the opposite end of this, we're settling in. So that's why I added this little squash and settle. I didn't just slam into this end pose. I allowed them to overshoot slightly and cushion into it. Now, of course, there were more poses than that involved, but those were the standout ones. I'm going to slow this down a little bit to 1/3 speed. So you can see at the beginning, anticipate, hold, blur, and slight overshoot on the end. Squish rather, and then up into that. And that's our wipe from one pose to another pose. As you might imagine, the same technique can get the character off screen just as efficiently. The only difference being you don't have to settle him into anything. You just transition that blob off screen. Something urgent's going on, so he's got to get to a meeting. So here's a fuller performance. Now, I created this one for one of my previous courses on how to hand animate in Flash. Now, you'll notice that the wipe, which gets the character from the pointing gesture back into his end pose or his settling pose. So you can integrate these kind of wipes into an otherwise completely conventional acting scene. So let me slow this down just a little bit, maybe to half speed. There you go. So let's play it through another time. How dare you? And now he will blur. So play it one more time. And this time I'll go to 1/3 speed. So to sum this up, this is a really nice technique to know, and definitely use it where you need to use it, but please don't overuse it. It's not a substitute for the hard work of animating from one pose into another pose, but it's a great method to use if you need to add a little cartooniness and just spice and extra energy. So it's certainly icing on the cake. In a previous movie, I showed you how to create a dialogue sequence with a cartoony male figure. And so now I want to show you a similar process with a cartoony female figure, although her attributes are, slightly more realistic and subtle than the super cartoony and goofy looking male figure. She's still pretty interesting. She's fun to look at. I really enjoyed animating this. And I actually hand drew it because, it was looking nice. And if you're wondering how I hand drew it in Photoshop. And it has a nice little timeline feature now. The later versions, I think CS5.5 and above, have a very basic timeline feature, but it does allow you to do hand-drawn in-betweens. You might want to look into that. So as you can see, the face has a little weight to the cheeks. We're moving everything. The entire area is plastic, meaning it's flexible. So as the mouth moves down, the lower eyelid moves down. I did lock in this shape here around the eye, but I could definitely have pulled that down just a little bit more. There's subtleties I could have added, but this is looking like a lot of fun. The different mouth shapes have nice contrast. They all are in the same family, but they're not stiff. They do move from one interesting shape into another interesting shape. Also notice that the corner of the mouth travels from north to south. And not just that, it's actually moving in a little kidney bean circular shape. And similarly with the lower lip, it's traveling from about here to about there. It's pretty bold. And let's take a look at the images. So here are the 6 most common shapes that you'll use in dialogue with their labels A through F. I've said this before, I'll say it again. These labels don't correspond to phonetic sounds. They're just labels to describe the shapes. So the A mouth, for example, will be used for closed phonemes like B, M, and P. The wide mouth is great for E sounds. The open mouth and the blended shapes between it and the others are great for vowel sounds. And the pursed mouth is ideal for ooh sounds. So this is closed mouth. So if you're saying me would be that, or from this one to that one, me. So that would be A, B, or A, C, B. You get the idea. Meow is the sound if you were to follow the entire range from A through F. So let's look at the process of creating these shapes. The secret is in the sequence in which you create the shapes. I always start with the closed mouth, the A mouth. In the AF labeling system, this is called the A. So the second shape to work on is the wide open mouth, or the D mouth. These two mouths and the many possible shapes between them will already allow you to create dialogue. And think of the Cookie Monster on Sesame Street. That's his entire range of motion. That's all he's got, from closed through open, back to closed again. And that's enough for generations of kids to be entertained. Obviously, we want to go beyond that, but that's the core of dialogue. You close on the consonants, you open on the vowels. So in green, I've put the A mouth. In blue, the D mouth. So you can compare the range of motion. And notice the nice little subtlety I added here with squishing the fat of the neck and the chin together. Really gives it like a real sense of physicality. The next most important mouth is the F shape, which will create the ooh sounds. Now try to, if your drawing is up to this, push this out from the plane of the face without feeling like it's floating in the air. And notice how I've moved the corner of the mouth out also. So we've moved this point here much forward. And you can make it more extreme. You can even eliminate that area completely and just have the ooh if you really wanted to exaggerate this. And here is the A and the F mouths overlaid in green and blue. And notice as well how we've pulled the nose down as it's being pulled forward. And if you rest your face, as I'm going to do now, A mouth, and then push it forward into the ooh. And if you do that yourself, you'll actually feel tension around the tip of your nose. So this is obviously an extreme exaggeration of that physical principle, but it really helps to make this look the way your dialogue feels when you say it. The last of these shapes that's crucial is the B mouth. It's the one you could not use if you were under a super extreme deadline, but I really think it's nice to have it if you can. And some people simply go from the A into the D in a series of open shapes, or they just have a very slight open mouth. Notice how here I've pulled it back. And if you, again, hold your mouth in a closed position and say me, and see what happens to the corners of your mouth. They pull right back. It feels like they're really moving to the edge of your face. So that's what we're trying to capture here. And this also generates a little arc motion, which we can then pull all the way down through the cycle of open shapes. So we're getting a nice little series of kidney beans, a circular chewing action on the corner of the mouth. Looks really nice. Here's the A mouth and the B mouth for comparison. And look at that sideways motion. It's pretty extreme in this case. So you may not want to go that far, or you may want to go further. So the 4 core shapes again are A, B, D, and F. Closed E shape, wide open vowel sound or shouts, loud dialogue, and the OO shape. The C and the E are in-betweens, really, between glorified in-betweens, as what they're best as between the B and the D and the D and the F. If you can create an animation with shape tweening, morph tweening, or some kind of blend shapes between these mouth shapes within the computer program, your life is pure joy, because then you can just select these or make intermediate keyframes between them, and you never have to draw the 7 billion in-betweens. And once again, just to end where we began, this is the final in-between by hand scene of our cartoony female figure with nice, chewy dialogue. In another movie, I showed you how to create chewy dialogue for a cartoony female character, but now we're going to look at a more realistic, typical design. And I've removed the hair because it's just distracting, so let's just focus on just the core of the face and the mouth and the surrounding area. So these are the 4 core mouth shapes, the A shape, the B, the D, and the F. These labels are not phonetic, they simply assign to the shape. So the A mouth is closed, this mouth will be used for the B and the P and the M sounds, and so on. So in the first pass, what we do is we create the A mouth, the closed mouth, and the D mouth, that's the wide open mouth. And that gives us this basic chewing, this up, down. It doesn't feel chewing yet, but it's starting to feel like it might. And that's our maximum range of horizontal to vertical motion. The next mouth that you could animate would be either the B mouth, which is the one that makes the E sound, or the F mouth, the one that makes the OO sound, whichever your preference is. In this case, I went with the B first, so we get a slight motion outwards on the way down. So if I play this at half speed, out and down. So if she says me or we, then we have a shape that's much more plausible for making that sound. And finally, the F mouth, or the pursed OO mouth. And now we have the entire family of visible shapes that will be able to represent the phonetic sounds coming out of the mouth. And the word meow would be a good way of describing it. If you can make a character say meow, incredibly as it may sound, you can make them say anything. So here are our 6 shapes: the A, the B, the C, which is an in-between between the B and the D, the E, which is an in-between between the D and the F. So again, our primaries are the A, the B, the D, and the F. So if you can create these shapes inside your CGI program or Flash Rig or Harmony Puppet, whatever tool you're working in, you're on a very good foundation for being able to generate anything. And I love setting up systems in Harmony or Flash where I can blend between these shapes. So I could put down a keyframe and a B and a keyframe and an E, and the program will in between the 7 or 8 in-betweens between one or the other, between any of these. It's tremendous fun to be able to watch the program do the in-between for you. And here's a nice graphic showing this classic female design with strong mouth shapes that I've really pushed. There is a natural tendency when animating female characters to be a little timid or restrained and feeling, oh, they won't look feminine if I push these mouth shapes, maybe the same way that I would push a male mouth shape. Well, that just isn't the case. You can pretty much treat these as aggressively as you can treat the male mouth. I mean, look, I've practically broken the jaw on this one, and it still looks like a girl. Same with all of these. None of them are looking masculine. You can twist these lips and you can twist these shapes, and you're giving them personality, but you're not changing her into a man by any stretch of the imagination. So don't be timid when it comes to designing mouth shapes. I was timid myself for far too long. And all you're doing is preventing yourself from growing and from enjoying the process of drawing. And if you push too far, you can always pull it back in again. When you go so far that it just looks like it's an alien or a Martian, fine, you've gone too far, then you pull it back in. So that is the coverage of a female, classic, more humanoid or realistic female mouth shape through a range of directions and motions. In this movie, we'll look at bird beaks. At first glance, a structure like a beak can look really complex, and making nice beaky shapes that work like a human mouth might seem to be a real puzzle. However, let's break it down into simple forms. In essence, a beak can be thought of as a pair of pyramids, each with 3 sides, a very simple shape. So I've coloured the upper half in green and the lower half in blue. So the more complex form of a beak, as traditionally drawn or designed, is built around this foundation. Most viewers will have no idea that the final beak on screen has been constructed around something so simple. So we can design shapes that break out of this when needed. The classic example is the ooh mouth shape. So let's make this beak appear to whistle. So I've done 2 things here to break out of the pyramid. Firstly, the ooh shape, which treats the hard beak like soft lips. Audiences have been watching cartoons doing this for years. So far, nobody has complained. So don't be scared of treating the beak as soft when necessary. See this little heart-shaped thing here. The other thing to notice is that I've rounded the corner of the beak here. This gives us a stronger and cartoonier design. I didn't have to do this, but it's good to know that you can. You can get away with it quite easily. And also, I deleted the line from the corner of the beak to the mouth, what could have been here. This makes the ooh shape stronger, more graphical. So here's the range of mouths in the standard meow series, going from the closed to the E shape to the open to the ooh. Now in this one, I've kept the shape throughout. I haven't pursed this into a completely rounded off shape. So it's not that you have to do that, but you can if you feel you need that extra bit of flexibility. And overlaid on that, the pyramid shape just lightly sketched in so you can see the construction process. It's natural to be worried about transitions. I mean, how can I get from one of these really strong shapes to another without it looking weird, jaggy, flashy? Most of the time, the best way is to snap from one into the other, sometimes with a little cushioning, 1 or 2 frames in between, but you can be quite bold. So for example, you can go from that shape to that shape, back to this one. The audience will buy a lot. So here's our 3/4 front view, again with the closed, the E shape, the open or the ooh, and as they're also known, A, B, D, and F. And there's the entire A, B, C, D, E, F range. Notice that the corner of the mouth here is pushing back slightly. If you're saying the word E, it pushes the corners of the mouth up. Then we in between in the C mouth into the D mouth, which is the maximum stretch down. And on this one, you really want to pull that mouth down as far as you're comfortable. And with the ooh, again, pull it forward. And you have the option, as we've already discussed, of rounding off that corner if you really want to get cartoony about it. So here's a profile bird, and just to show you the same principles in the side-on view where you can really see it. This is more like a seagull. I didn't really try to make it a specific species, but you get the idea. Now, the thing to watch out for is to be really brave about the up-down motion. As you can see here, the up point is somewhere around here, and the maximum down point, if I can follow it, is somewhere around here. So we're traveling the mouth quite a bit. We have a nice circular motion on the corner of the mouth. So it's a lovely chewy animation. Let me slow it down by about half. And you can see we're snapping into this lovely ooh shape. And look, you're barely even noticing it. And when we go back to full speed, what it conveys is just flexibility. It's lovely. Here's a smaller beak, something more similar to a sparrow's, but again, following the same basic rules. It's a different angle, an upshot, but by now you should be able to notice the pyramidal construction of the beak. It's invisible on the surface, but it's there beneath the design of every frame I drew here. So regardless of the angle of the beak or the design of the beak, the basic principles are the same. Keep the construction simple, though of course you can add complexity over the simplicity. You can add all kinds of bumps and scallops and details to a beak to make it more complex. But as long as the beak is built on this basic, simple pyramidal foundation, you should be safe. Don't be scared to push the beak, to break some of it, to treat it as a little more flexible than it is in real life. Even though it's hard as bone in real life, doesn't mean that your animation has to be stiff. You can flap a shape here and there to really make it feel alive. and keep the dialogue chewy. Don't be afraid to move the edges of the beak into nice, circular, strong motions. Also, don't forget that as a result of this, some of the surrounding face is going to get pulled. So pull that lower eyelid down, fat around the chin, do all of that good stuff to keep it feeling like it's made out of meat. So off with you and have good luck with that. Occasionally, it'll be necessary to make a geometrical object speak, maybe for a talking logo or some really strong and stylized project. The most famous example of this would be the doorknobs in Alice in Wonderland, where the keyhole functioned as the mouth. So I wanted to demonstrate 3 extremely simple shapes to show how you might approach the challenge of making a triangle talk or a square talk or something very simple. So in this graphic, you'll see the triangular, the square, the circular. I left the peanut mouth out because basically it's just a variation on the circular mouth. But that gives you the idea. You can make variations on these. You're not limited to these basic ones. There's all kinds of things you could do, but these will be the general principles of how you approach it. So in this case, I took a basic form, the triangle, and I used the traditional A through F mouth shapes to focus on the closed mouth, the E-shaped mouth, the wide open mouth or the D mouth, and then the U shape or the F mouth here. The challenge is if you can design these shapes in these 4 forms and do so with a pleasing design, you've cracked it. So these are the triangles or the pyramidal shape. And again, I've just put teeth inside them. You could take those teeth out. This will still work as dialogue, just as pure silhouette. Same goes for the square mouth, and indeed this little indent here, I could take that out and just keep it as a pure rectangle. That'll still work. And the same applies to the circular mouths. And let's just look at them, A, B, D, F. And then overlaid is a very useful tool. So this is a nice little color code just to give you the different layers and the range of motions that I designed for these different shapes. You're not obligated to follow this pattern, but this will give you a feeling for how I achieved my particular sequence of shapes and how they worked. A, B, D, F and the square shapes, and also overlaid. Green on the bottom, then blue, then red, then the darkest F is on the top. And here we go from the circular shapes as well. And you'll notice from the closed mouth, I just push the corners back slightly on the B or the blue mouth. So we get a nice series of contrasting shapes. So as we build out the rest of the series from that, we know we're on very good ground. So here's the final colored animation, just to show you what the end result of what a graphic style can look like. Great for games and stuff like that. So I hope this gives you some idea of how to tackle a non-human or geometrical shape or form. Again, the main thing to remember is, can you create those 4 basic shapes, closed, the E mouth, the wide open mouth, and the U mouth? And if you can't, you might have a problem on your hands. So good luck with your graphical mouths. Here's a really fun dialogue action that emerged from some sketches that I created from my previous course on how to draw animated characters. It's got a lot of squash and stretch, as well as being really interesting to look at. So initially, as part of that drawing course, I wanted to show how to illustrate older characters, those with some weight and wrinkles, loose skin. And so I did this quick character sketch, and then I just designed these 3 shapes in profile. And as I drew them, I even had like a mental image of Granny coming up to her poor little grandkid going, "Come here, give Granny a kiss." Like that. I mean, actually imagine that, because you really want to get inside the head of these characters. So I thought that was like a really nice, fun-looking drawing with a lot of vitality to it, even though she's very, very old. A lot of personality there. So how would you go about creating a dialogue scene with that? So here's the final sequence. I'm naming the mouths with the traditional TV naming convention of A through F. It's extremely useful. I've said this in previous courses, I'll say it again, they do not correspond to phonetic sounds, so that the A mouth is the closed mouth for M, B, and P sound shapes. The wide open mouth would be good for vowel sounds, the B mouth for E sounds, and this, of course, for OO sounds. So I'm going to show you the sequence in which I created these various shapes. So the first one to start from is the closed mouth. Second was the open or D mouth. On the right side, I've overlaid them in blue and green. So we have the A mouth in green and the open D mouth in blue. And this allows you to see the extent of change or motion between them. So if you want to try to follow along with your own elderly character or a variation of this, that'll give you an idea of the amount of travel you're going to have to induce in the character's mouth shape to match this. Notice also, it might be hard to see, but there's a tiny little pull down of the nose and even there on the lower eyelid. It's extremely small, but it's just enough to stop it from reading like it's held. Next, and working again over the A mouth for reference, I created the F mouth, which will be the OO sound. And again, on the right side, you can see them overlaid for comparison in green and blue. Notice that the slight motion on the lower eyelid and the nose to follow the primary motion of the mouth. So the mouth is moving forward and pulling a lot of the rest of the shapes of the face with it. I also like to draw your attention to the increase in volume in the cheek between the A and the F shapes. Normally we recommend that you don't increase or decrease volume in the shape, but of course the cheeks can inflate and deflate with air. So it's one body part that can violate this rule on occasion. And also here, because she's so saggy on the face, she's able to push, that flesh forward and just basically, for that one brief moment, achieve a little increase in volume. And the most subtle of our four main shapes is the B mouth, which creates the E sound. Many people just make the B mouth a straight in between the A and the D, but I always like to push it back. So if you look at my green A mouth here, look at how far back I've pulled the corner of the B to get that circular chewing action going. And it's also got the virtue of it's pulled the cheek mask back. If I really wanted to push this, I'd have pulled the jewelry back a little bit and even the ear. I had to draw the line somewhere with this though, but even the little crease, it might be hard to see, but there's a little crease there in the corner that's been pinched. So those are our four main shapes. I call them the four. There's six here. Why? Well, C is it's an in-between. It's a glorified in-between for, some degree of smoothness in here. And the E is also pretty much an in-between. That's a tricky one, but it's certainly just transitioning from the D to the F. So these then become your six shapes. And in order to say the word hello, you'd start with B, C, D, C, E, F. And you get the idea. So that would be the sequence of keyframes that you would assign to the timeline. So here's the scene animated with in-betweens. Notice the very subtle motion that we're seeing here on the lower eyelid, the track. We understand by this and by the jawline following along and even the two creases, it tapers off around here. But this creates the impression that we're not looking at something that's like a layer crudely bolted on. The whole mass of the face is moving, so it's one consistent unified object. And finally, one last look now in tone. Looks really nice. So as I've said in all my movies about dialogue, strive to make the action nice and chewy, create good strong shapes and those four primary keys. And if you're going for a realistic or a richer style of motion, be sure to have some of the dialogue affect the surrounding areas of the face, such as the nose or the lower eyelid. And of course, this nice circular motion as well is just gravy. A breakdown is often thought of simply as the largest gap between two keys, as in this example, key 1, key 2, breakdown. This can be the case, but in skilled hands, a breakdown is much more than that. Let's look at the simplest possible breakdown right here. When the turn is fully in between, we get this smooth but bland turn. Note that the turn does nothing of interest. The eye lines, the nose lines, all of it, they're just flat. The center breakdown is as dull as you could hope for. It's 50% right down the middle. So there's the overlay for proof. So let's do something more exciting on the breakdown and let's see how this affects the entire animation. Let's dip the head. Instantly, this is a different scene. Now bear in mind that the keys are supposed to be the most important frames, but see how we can vastly improve the action by adding this extra movement to the breakdown. So when we see the keys in the breakdown side by side in one image, you can see the dip with the red line for the eye lines. That's the only change I made. And here they are overlaid exactly as they appear relative to one another for comparison. So now we'll do the opposite, and on the breakdown I'm going to move the head up and see what that does. That's pretty cool, but it's like he's looking at a jet flying by or something. I wouldn't use this sort of turn very often. It's more natural to dip on a turn, but this is still interesting. And here they are, side by side. And again, overlaid for comparison. Now we're going to do something much more subtle. There's no rule that says we have to place the breakdown in the precise center of the turn. We can favor one key or the other. So in this case, I've made a radically close favor, almost I think about 1/6 towards the first key, and I've added a slight tilt to the head, so it feels like he's leading into the turn with his ear. Now this is just incredible. It really looks zingy. When you start to create these kinds of breakdowns, you're moving away from the simpler styles of animation common to TV shows and webisodes and those kind of things, and you're moving closer to feature quality work. So again, here are the three images side by side, so you can see the dip on the ear if you compare to that red line. And here they are overlaid for comparison in terms of space, the amount of motion from one to the other. So this shows you the power of experimenting with the breakdowns. When I created this particular breakdown, I really wasn't entirely sure what it would look like. I had a general idea, but I didn't think it would look this cool, honestly. I could have done all kinds of different favors or motions or moved it up to one side or varied it in any number of ways. We've already seen how this small selection of adjustments to the breakdown completely transform the overall animation. So don't take your breakdowns for granted. Think about them and find out if you can add some extra magic to your scene just by being brave with the breakdowns. So now let's look at how we can take a reaction shot, in this case a really sad reaction shot, and add some vitality to it by adding a breakdown. So these are the straight in-between breakdown. There's nothing happening on the breakdown other than a absolutely obedient 50% midway between the two keys. This just isn't really good enough if you want to go, to the next level with your animation. And when we overlay the images, you'll see everything's moving in a straight line. There's no arcing happening. It's just a machine in between. So what I'm going to do on this one is something really subtle. I bet you can't even see it here because it is so subtle, but let's move to the next video. There's a very slight arc happening on the breakdown now. So this hasn't really added much drama, but it's certainly a much prettier movement. It's starting to lose some of that mechanical aspect to it. And again, when we apply the overlay of these three frames with the green key, the first key in green and the end in blue, you will notice that we have the beginnings of a slight arc happening on the breakdown. And indeed throughout, you'll see it on the mouth, you'll see it on the nose, even the points of the ear. So now I'm going to take this principle and push it quite a bit further. And before going on, I want to note that sometimes less is more. The previous animation is probably okay for like a basic motion, but I want to see what happens when we push this. Can we get something extra out of it or something even a little bit unexpected? And lo and behold, I think we do. This has immediately really enhanced the sense of dimension to the head. Suddenly we're not looking at these flat objects anymore. It does seem to have a real space, mass to it. Now, you can't do this with every breakdown. If you did it with every breakdown in your scene, I think it might look over-animated. The important thing is knowing when and where you can apply this and where you should and shouldn't, but you learn by doing and by overdoing it. And this is a really nice example of getting essentially almost a free reaction shot out of two keyframes. It's easier if you can apply a lot of this magic to the breakdowns in the scene rather than having it all loaded onto the keys. Let's vary this a little more, see what else we can get away with. Before I go on, actually, I want to show you those images overlaid. So again, you can compare, the position. It's really not that much. It was a slight nudge further to one side, provided us that nice little turn. So now I'm going to push the head in the opposite direction, really pulling it out towards the viewer and then back again to end on the original keyframe. Now this is starting to look like a very nice eye-catching take, like he's seen something and just reacted to it, like he can't believe it. And then he's doing this like stunned reaction. And again, two keyframes, one breakdown, and you have a nice simple take. And again, there's the overlay for comparison. And you can see that we've really shot the breakdown out to here. It even looks a little bit funky, to be honest, design-wise. Once this thing is moving, very hard to notice. So you get away with a lot of weird-looking drawings when you move things nice enough, when everything is arced along a nice, smooth path. So it's a very effective little scene. On this one, I pushed the breakdown probably further than I should, and I'll confess this head is a little too big. He's gaining volume, probably should be closer down to here. So with all those caveats, let's take a look at the animation, see what it turned out like. So beyond the volume error of the head, that's still a super extreme reaction. It's like a pretty violent take. But if you were to combine these different breakdowns or add another keyframe to turn the head one way, then this way, then back again, you can see how you could really make this guy look like his head spinning around. And the beauty of building the turn into the breakdown, it just gives you control. You've got control on the timing chart. You can really, pace the movement of the thing. And it's a very effective way to work. And again, here are the frames in overlay. At some point, the breakdowns change so much, they might as well be a keyframe. And this one is pushing it. It's really pushing it. You might just say, right, this is so far gone. There's no way I can achieve this and even think about it as a breakdown frame anymore. So there's a gray area with some of this. So don't feel too confused about, hey, wait a minute, why isn't that a keyframe? Push it far enough, it'll turn into one. So it's about finding out where the categories break. And I think we're probably at the very outer perimeter over here of what is and what is not a breakdown frame. So I want to end this with a much more subtle one and a frame that really clearly is a breakdown frame, going from the down position back into the up position. What if we do something really subtle, really nice, and we just do radically favor the first of the two keys? What do we get? So you notice the nose is dipping on the breakdown, and we get, as a result of that, more of the frames favor the down position. We get a much harder snap into the up position, a feeling of weight and mass and squishiness on the face. I would work with this a little bit more to tie it down. But as you can see, it's a pretty nice action. If I was going for like a squishy kind of character, something in the classic Looney Tunes 1940s bouncy style, this will be a nice technique to use to try to capture that feeling. So let's look at the drawings for this one again in overlay. And you can notice here how the nose is actually dipping down on the breakdown. So a lot of it, like the top of the head, is a straight in between, pretty much. So is the ear. Most of the rest of the face, the mouth is favoring the closed position. The eyes are about 1/6 of the way down, and we're arcing up this way. But that dip on the nose is the one extreme action happening on the breakdown. And that's what gives you the extra vitality within what is fundamentally a very simple animation. Now we'll look at how to apply breakdowns to more complex actions. This time we have 3 keyframes. It's a simple punch. The character starts in frame 1, moves into an anticipation to the punch on frame 15, and hits on frame 21. I'm working on 30 frames per second. You can work on 24 if you like. I'm not going to bother you about it. Let's take a look at the frames. So these are our 3 key poses, and that produced the animation that you've already seen. Now here they're overlaid on top of each other, and I've color-coded them for clarity. So green's on the bottom, then blue with the latest one in dark gray right on the top. So you can see the relative space. So now I'll show you the keys with the crude breakdowns. These are the basic breakdowns, nothing fancy, just halfway between. And when you arrange these in a row of 5 with their frame numbers, we have these 5 poses. The keyframe, the breakdown, the keyframe, the breakdown, the keyframe. Now for some projects, you know what? This will be fine. Some projects like these very simple, almost austere, styles of motion. But what if you want to go above that and aspire to the classic look? So let's break up the breakdown poses. On the first breakdown, number 8, we'll make an anticipation. On the second breakdown, I frankly decided to experiment and lead with the shoulder. So he's almost swinging his side body around. And I thought this might make a bigger impact because I'm pulling this hand back and the hand now has further to travel before slamming into the wall. So let's go side by side. That was the basic breakdown pose. And this is the experimental one, trying to add some vitality to it. So let's take a look at the new animation, see what it looks like. I like the anticipation, looks good. I'm not so sure about the punch. And it's certainly more flexible, no question about that. But I just don't think I succeeded in selling that, boom, that really hard impact. I learned something by the mistake. I learned that if I want to make a character look a little wimpy, then this is certainly the way to do it. It's a nice trick to have. And I'm sure if I experimented some more with a different breakdown position, then yes, I could definitely probably by on the breakdown, like pulling that hand like way back in depth so that it's tiny, like way back here, and then smashing it into the wall really fast. But the poses by themselves look great. It's just the animation as a whole just softens the impact for some reason. Anyway, this is why I stress this is all about thinking, I wonder will that work? Trying it. Part of it works, maybe some of it doesn't. Maybe you get an effect different from what you intended. So I'm leaving this error in the course and you can take it for what it is. So now let's see how these drawings overlay. So that was the first frame. There was the breakdown into the anticipation. This is the anticipation. And then we have the second breakdown into the impact. So we have frame 1 is here in green, frame 15 in blue. There was the original breakdown. There was the corrected one. So you can see how I pushed it down. Now we have the second half from 15 to 21, and the original bad breakdown was here, and then my experimental breakdown is there. So if you want homework, you can try trying something different. And if I had this to do again, I would put the breakdown of the head here, really hold the entire body back, and I would find a way to pull that arm, this red fist here, somewhere over there. I bet the wall would feel that. Okay, so let's move on. So these are our beginning and our end states side by side. Now, if you look at the one on the left, again, quite stiff, seems to be doing nothing particularly interesting. But the guy on the right, he's up to something definitely. They're bending the legs, bringing the body down, moving the fist up into a bunch like that. Even with that wimpy impact, it's still a better scene than the one on the left. So again, the importance of this is to have the high-level control over these quite complex actions. The one thing I will warn you about is when you begin to do this is that the arc patterns will become much more intricate. As you move from this position down into this position, back into this position, then into this one, the movements will go from a simple pendulum arc into something that will be more like a figure eight or a peanut or a lozenge or these kind of looping patterns. So you have to plot the arcs and just watch your arcs on the head, on the hand, any body part that's now moving outside of a simple 1, 2, 3. Obviously, any 3 points you can plot with a simple curve. Once you have 5, then all kinds of magic begins to happen, and you want to be in control of that magic and make sure that you don't have things arcing out in weird patterns. That will look truly ugly. My only takeaway from this in terms of adding fancy motions to the breakdowns, it's going to add complexity to your arcs, and do keep a very sharp eye on them to make sure that you don't have jaggy motions.